In the world of academics, there are sometimes different theologies that you see being taught more rigorously than others, and you kind of have seen, especially since the 1800s, there's been a lot of schools that teach dispensationalism. Moody Bible Institute, Dallas Theological Seminary, Grace Seminary, all these seminaries that teach primarily, Biola, I think, is another one. A lot of these seminaries, they teach dispensationalism. And that's been a predominant way of spreading this form of theology throughout the U.S. The Scofield Reference Bible did that, obviously, in a large way. But through Scofield, you had the Dallas Scofield's influence over the president who founded Dallas Theological Seminary. That's how that came into being, and Scofield and Darby were also big influences on D.L. Moody, and he came up with Moody Bible Institute. And so you see a lot of these very, very dispensational schools, and that is how a lot of this dispensationalism became prevalent, especially here on American soil. But what's very interesting is there seems to be it's very positive, a very upwards trend of dispensationalism slowly starting to see itself out of the academic world. It seems to me that as of late, dispensationalism is starting to be seen for what it is, a false system of theology, a man-made system of theology, a very anti-Catholic, small c, system of theology. It denies a lot of the historic parts of Christianity that have always been affirmed. It's ostracized itself from being considered part of what we confess in the creeds when we say one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And it is in total discontinuity with the plan of redemption that the church has always believed, which is ultimately and sadly an attack on the very gospel itself. Now, am I saying that dispensationalists are not saved? Obviously not. I do believe that they hold to what I would call essentials, but their theology does an extreme, it distorts those excuse me, it distorts those essentials to such a degree that if taken too far, can put somebody outside the realm of orthodoxy. And I would say dispensationalism as a whole is outside the realm of orthodoxy. And I believe that there are a lot of churches and schools that are starting to see this, even very staunchly dispensational ones. So I have a friend that I've talked to who attends a Baptist seminary. Well, I'm not going to say the names of these schools particularly just for privacy's sake, but he attends a Baptist school and has reported that dispensationalism is actually what once was a very thriving dispensational school is now beginning to be quite disdainful towards classical dispensationalism, and those who are dispensationalists adopt now what's called progressive dispensationalism, which is more of the updated version that starts to realize, hey, we should not be separating Israel and the church from one another. God's plan of redemption was to expand Israel's boundaries to include the Gentiles, not to create a new entity separate. And so there's continuity there in progressive dispensationalism, which again, to me, is an improvement and a lack of care for the classical dispensationalism. The school that I'm attending right now, Moody Bible Institute, I will say that name because my privacy doesn't matter, but, well, it does in certain areas. But at Moody Bible Institute, they are known to be one of the most aggressively dispensational institutions, and yet I have been quite surprised to find that most of their curriculum has a fair share of differing perspectives. You find amillennialism, you find postmillennialism, you find premillennialism, historic dispensationalism. You kind of find them all, and they're teaching them all, and they're teaching them all not in the sense of these ones are bad and this one is good, but in the sense of this is theology. And I've noticed that there are even some classes that I've taken where there's an emphasis on the more amillennial perspective. And so I'm really grateful to see that here's a dispensational school that still stands by their dispensational convictions that is actually starting to recognize and move away from just teaching the dispensational view, but is also opening and allowing biblical views to be represented in addition. And the other thing I've noticed, and this is another just interesting note, the churches in America that are dying out are dispensational churches. The dispensational churches in America are slowly dying out. You don't see a lot of people attending them anymore. A lot of these independent churches, these Bible churches and independent Baptist churches and things like that, they are slowly dying out. Their congregations are shrinking. And to me, this is just a testimony to the fact that dispensationalism, when it's prioritized at the top of your priorities in terms of doctrine, your church is going to slowly shrink away. And so I find this to be a blessing from God. I think dispensationalism has done a lot of damage, not just in its theological implications, but in its ability to ostracize other true Christians from the fellowship of the faith, because dispensationalists take such an anti-anything Catholic view. And so I'm grateful to see this, and my purpose in sharing this was not just to go, hey, look at me, I'm going to gloat over the dispensationalists, but to say that as theology is studied, as we open our Bibles and we say, Lord, show me what's in your word, God will lead us to truth. And he never will have truth that is in conflict with the church. I truly believe this as somebody who considers himself very Catholic, small c for those who are, Roman Catholic. No, not Roman Catholic. As somebody who considers himself very Catholic, when we look in history and we go back to the first century and we trace that line all the way up to the present, there are certain things that we can see that there is continuity all throughout. And where there is discontinuity, we can recognize that as an anomaly, as something that is not part of the faith once for all handed down to the saints, and we can get rid of it. And so unfortunately, a lot of evangelicals during the Second Great Awakening were quite taken with dispensationalism. And instead of asking themselves, is this consistent with the historic Christian faith, they ate it up because of its sensationalism, and because at the time of the Second Great Awakening, you also had the Enlightenment kind of going on, and so a lot of people trying to think for themselves. We don't need to follow tradition. We can look and figure it out ourselves. And this is one of the errors that comes along with a improper understanding of sola scriptura, and even with, I'll say, to a certain extent, a proper understanding of sola scriptura as a whole. And so my point in bringing this up is to say that when we are faithful to study the church and recognize that we are to learn from the church, and ultimately learn from the church with our Bibles open to verify that what the church is teaching throughout time, we're following the scriptures and the church together as one beautiful unit, God will lead us to truth. And it seems to me that the progress I'm seeing in the academics on the evangelical Protestant side of things, it seems to me that they're doing just that. They're trying to find more continuity with the historic church, and they're moving further and further away from that which is in conflict with it, which dispensationalism certainly is. And so let that be an encouragement to you, and let it be an encouragement to you to keep studying as we pursue unity in the faith.